been seeking the Lord's will for our lives, and we've kind of gone in different directions. And, I was thinking tonight before the service, one of the sweetest things about heaven is going to be when we finally get to sit down with all the folks that we have like minds with. And we get to catch up, and we get to talk about it. And we're not heading in different directions all the time. But he's burning up the road. You said how many? 50,000 miles a year. And anyway, he's on the road a lot. So you pray for him, for his safety. Pray for his dear family. He's got kids in different places. I think you said New York City. Oh, man. He's got some up in New York City up there. And no grandkids yet, but probably won't be too long. All right, they'll be on the way. But anyway, you pray for him as he travels for the foundation, and he tries to help folks all over everywhere, as the intention is tonight. So you pray for him tonight as you come. Hopefully, if you didn't get a folder, if you'll raise your hand, we'll bring one of those around to you, and we'll make sure that everybody has one. All right? All right, Brother Todd, come on.
Thank you. I appreciate the honor and opportunity to be here tonight. And I have really, really enjoyed being here today. I came to try to be a blessing, but I have to confess I have been far more blessing received than I believe I have given. I told somebody before service earlier, I wish Brother Allen and I lived closer together. Sometimes when the Lord calls you into ministry, you end up being miles away from those you love the most and would rather be close to the most, but when you're in ministry, you go where God calls you to go. We enjoyed the fellowship today with Brother Jim and Miss Jan over lunch, and my mother really enjoyed being here. She's gone back to her home church tonight, but thank you for allowing me to be here today, and we are your Free Will Baptist Foundation, and we are your servants, and most of all the Lord's servants. But I did hand out a book tonight, and the service is going to be a little different tonight. It's going to be kind of a lot of teaching of information that is very practical information about end-of-life planning. And if you didn't get one of these books, I have some more on the front pew up here. Did anybody not get one? Would you raise your hand? Anybody need one of these books that did not get one? And Brother Allen, if you see anybody slip in that might need one, I've got those up there. As I mentioned this morning, and I just want to reiterate this tonight, there are some companies out in the world that do some of the things that we as a Free Will Baptist Foundation does. And again, I am not saying this is bad what they do. They have to feed their families and put food on their table just like anybody else. But there is a big difference, and just to explain the difference, those companies are oftentimes for-profit. Their representatives make commission, and sometimes when they help a couple or an individual, it's kind of their foot in the door to be able to try to sell other services and things like that. With our foundation, we are the opposite of all of those things. We are a nonprofit. We are a ministry. Representatives like myself are salaried just like pastors. So when we help couples or individuals, we are not making one dime of commission off of them. My greatest benefit of serving you is the honor and joy to serve you and your family. And we don't have an ulterior motive to try to sell you other services. We just want to provide information to help you make wise, informed, prayerful decisions about being a good steward of that which God has blessed you. And we partner with the attorneys in states all across the United States. They do the legal side, and we do the ministry side. If you come tonight and you get the information and we don't help you, and you've learned some things that can help you make wise, prayerful, good stewardship decisions, then we are thankful we had the privilege to do that. At the end, I will share with you, if you do want us to help you, how we can do that. And we have helped over 2,500 couples or individuals, going on almost 3,000 now. And we do have some services where we can help folks. But I just want to share some information tonight that I believe will be very practical in helping us as we think about being good stewards of that which God has blessed us. But before I get started tonight, I want to open in a word of prayer. So let's pray. Father, once again, we come humbly before the throne of grace tonight, and we do thank you for the privilege to serve you and to serve others. Thank you for Macropine Free Will Baptist Church and Pastor Allen and his family and the impact this church has on this community and around the world. Lord, thank you for the soldiers of the cross here that have served many years faithfully. And Lord, we thank you that you allow us to be good stewards of that which you have blessed us with. And we pray that you'd bless our time together tonight. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen and amen. As I've mentioned, our Free Will Baptist Foundation, we are a ministry, and we have been in existence for more than 40 years. And we partner with Cornerstone estate planning and help people with end-of-life planning. And so the actual pages in the book are going to match the slides on the screen. However, this first slide is not in the book. So you just might want to write these 3 things on page 1 or somewhere in the book. But as you think about end-of-life planning, there are 3 ways in North Carolina that you can settle your estate. Now, when I say settle your estate, what I mean is to prepare for end of life, to have some legal documents in place to make sure that when you go home to be with the Lord, or if you become incapacitated, you have the person of your choosing that would make decisions on your behalf, or that would be able to help after death handle that which God blessed you in life. And one of the things, as Brother Allen mentioned already, I do want to have a few minutes at the end to answer some questions, and it might be that while I'm sharing this presentation, some questions might come to your mind. And what I would encourage you to do is write those questions down, and then at the end we'll have some questions and answer time if we have some time allowed. But it might be that during the presentation I end up answering that question. So if you can try to hold off on the questions till the end, it might be that I answer them. If I don't, I still hope to have a little bit of time at the end. But in the state of North Carolina and in most states, there's basically 3 ways that an individual or couple can settle their estate. One way is to do nothing. Of course, Dave Ramsey is a financial teacher, Christian teacher. He says that about 60% of Christians, 60 to 70% of Christians don't have anything in place to protect their family. Now, just to get your input here, and there is no right or wrong answer, but kind of an icebreaker here, I just want to get your input here. And there's probably several answers that are right. But somebody tell me tonight, why is it when it comes to end-of-life planning, why do people do nothing? Anybody? And there's several good answers. They don't want to face the fact of death. People don't like to talk about death. That's a very good answer, and that's a very good reason. Why else do people do nothing? Anybody? They're not ready, exactly. Sometimes people just want to do what? Put it off. What do we call that? Procrastination. Has anybody ever procrastinated about anything? I was in one of our churches one time, and I said, has anybody ever procrastinated about anything? And one brother spoke out loud and said, I'll raise my hand later. We all have procrastinated. And of course, what will happen if we do nothing, and we pass away, the state of North Carolina will step in and the court system gets involved, and they'll write something on behalf of ourselves or our family, and it may or may not be what we intended. So we just go ahead and mark that one off the list because we do not believe that is being a wise steward of what God has blessed us with. Another way in most states that people will settle their estate is what's called a will. Legally, it is called a last will and testament. And so basically, if it's a married couple, there would be a last will and testament for the husband and a last will and testament for the wife. If it's a single person, widow or widower, then they will just have one for themselves. It's a legal document that states who you want in charge and who you want getting what after death. And it kind of sits around in a safe until you go home to be with the Lord. And then is when that will becomes active. Now, there are a couple of potential weaknesses of wills. Number one is basically it inserts what God blessed you with. It inserts your estate into the probate court process. And how many of you have ever heard of probate court? It's basically the judicial application and administration for the distribution of your estate. When I talk about probate court tonight, I'm not necessarily talking about when one spouse passes away. I know a lot of states practice what's called summary probate. So sometimes, depending on how assets are titled, when one spouse passes away, there may or may not be a probate. What I'm really talking about tonight is multi-generational probate, when that single person, widow or widower, or when both mom and dad have passed away, and now things are passing down to the next generation. So basically, things go through that court process, which takes time, and it is public. The other issue is that someone can contest the will or protest provisions within the will, and a judge has the legal authority to satisfy all parties are involved or to determine who is right or wrong. And of course, sometimes people will say, well, Brother Todd, I've got great kids and they get along. And I say, if you have perfect kids, that's wonderful. I don't. But even if you've got good kids and they get along, it doesn't always have to be somebody that's listed in the will that will contest it. We had a situation in South Carolina in the town of Spartanburg where there was a husband and a wife, and they passed away, and things were going through probate court, and there was a lawn care company. And if you have a lawn care business, I'm not picking on people that have lawn care businesses, it's just what happened. But there was a lawn care business that basically said, hey, they said they would pay us more than what we actually got paid, and they contested it while it was in court, and it ended up holding it up for 3 years. And so here was a outside company, somebody not in the will, that contested it. Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to win. Obviously, they're going to have to prove their side, but basically it held it up in court. It held up the distribution, all because this company that said they were owed more than what they said they got paid. And so a will basically inserts what you have into the probate court process. It is public. It does take time, anywhere between 6 months to 2 years. And it does leave the court in charge depending on various factors and circumstances. So it is a route that some people take. There is a third way that you can settle your estate, and it is what's called a revocable living trust. And this is one thing that our Free Will Baptist Foundation is encouraging families and couples and individuals to take a strong look at. But a revocable living trust, it is a legal document just like a will is a legal document. Just like a will states who you want in charge and who you want getting what, a trust states who you want in charge and who you want getting what. One of the big differences between a will and a trust is you can actually deed and title assets into a trust. So for example, my wife and I, we've got 3 children. They're all grown. They're married. My wife and I, that which the Lord has blessed us, our house and various assets, used to be deeded and titled as Todd and Teresa Smith. Now they're deeded and titled as the Smith Revocable Living Trust, Todd and Teresa Smith trustees. Nothing has changed in how my wife and I operate our day-to-day life. We continue filing tax return, paying our bills, doing everything financially. We didn't lose any control of anything that we have. We still have complete control of everything that we own. But when I pass away, or if my wife passes away first, the surviving spouse automatically owns everything. Everything flows to the surviving spouse. And when both of us go home to be with the Lord, that which God has blessed us will flow to our children or our intended beneficiaries without the need for probate court and government involvement. So, how many of you think it would be a good idea to keep the government out of your family business? So we're going to talk about that tonight. So open up your books with me. You may feel like you're kind of drinking through a fire hydrant tonight, and I'll try to go slow enough for you to understand the concepts, but quick enough that we can get through all that we need to cover. But we live in America and we pay taxes. What kind of taxes do we pay? Well, if you have a job and you earn income, then you earn income, you have to pay income taxes. Or if you have a house or a car or a boat or an RV, what kind of tax do you pay? You pay property tax. Or if you go to the mall and you buy something for your kids or grandkids, or you go to the grocery store, what kind of tax do you pay? You pay sales tax. Well, the government came up with another type of tax, and it's called capital gains tax. And what it basically means, if you were wise and you made some investments and you made a profit on those investments, that is considered a capital gain. So in elementary simple terms, it basically means you bought something down here and you sold it up here, and everything in between is a capital gain. Does the government want some of that? Certainly. Currently, the minimum capital gains tax is 15%. So let me use an illustration here. So let's say you bought and I'm going to use just some simple figures here. I know when I say this, you're probably going to say, where is that cabin at the lake? Because I'd like to get one too. But I'm just trying to use easy math here, okay? But let's say my wife and I went out and bought a little small cabin at the lake. And just for easy math, let's say this little small cabin at the lake was $50,000. It was a real fixer-upper. But we bought it down here. We bought it for $50,000. And let's say we fix it up, we remodel it, we use it as a little family get-together sometimes, and then we decide we're going to sell it. So if we bought it for $50,000 and we decided we're going to sell it for $150,000, help me out, church, what is the capital gain? We bought it for $50,000, we're selling it for $150,000. What's the capital gain? $100,000. What is the minimum capital gains tax? 15%. So that's basically a $15,000 tax on a profit that we made off an investment. So sometimes here is what people will say. Well, I just want my kids to get this asset after I die, so I'm going to put their names on the asset with me while I am alive, and therefore when I die they'll get it tax-free. Is that right or wrong? So let me explain this. So let's go back to the illustration of the cabin at the lake. So let's say you buy this cabin at the lake. I'm going to use my wife and I as an illustration. Let's say we bought this cabin at the lake for $50,000, and we put on the deed with us Victoria, Cameron, and Hunter. We want them to get it after we die. And we're just going to keep it until we die. And so let's say we bought it for $50,000. We put the kids' names on the deed with us. We fix it up. We've used it for a family get-together. And let's say, Lord forbid, we died in 2023. And our kids go to sell that cabin at the lake. Here's what happens basically. The government, the IRS, says, wait a minute. You kids were on deed with mom and dad while they were alive. Therefore, we've got to go back to that time to get the cost basis to calculate the capital gains tax. They bought that cabin and it was worth $50,000. And now they've passed away and you're trying to sell it for $150,000, but you didn't inherit it. You were on the deed with them. So we have to use the $50,000 cost basis. They sell it for $150,000. What's the capital gain? $100,000. What is $100,000 times 15%? $15,000. What did we pass along to our children, even though we may not have intended to do so, by putting their name on the deed with us? We passed along the potential $15,000 capital gains tax. I want you to circle at the bottom of that page the words stepped up cost basis. If you don't learn anything else tonight, I think this one principle was worth you learning tonight and being here. So here is what basically the IRS says. If you will allow your heirs to inherit what you have after death, instead of putting their names on it with you while you're alive, you get to step up the cost basis at death. So let's go back to the cabin at the lake. So let's say my wife and I, we buy this cabin at the lake, and we have a trust, so we're going to deed it into our trust. We're not going to put the kids' names on it with us while we're alive. We're going to let them inherit it from us after we die. So we bought the cabin at the lake for $50,000. We didn't put their names on it. They're going to get it after death. We fixed it up, and we enjoyed it as a family little get-together. Let's say, Lord forbid, we passed away in 2023. Our kids are inheriting it after death. And so here's what the government says. Hey, you kids inherited this problem. This problem. So sometimes a house or a cabin might be a problem, right? Brother Allen and I were just discussing the things that have gone. I got to go home and fix a dryer this week. And he's had a few things go out on him here lately. And I told my mom, I said, I was feeling selfish because I had a dryer to go out. And then I called Brother Allen, got a hot water heater and a lawnmower to go out. So anyway, he didn't ask me to say this. Matter of fact, if he knew if I was going to say it, he probably would tell me not to. But if you want to give him a hallelujah handshake and help him with a lawnmower, I bet he would appreciate it. And again, he didn't ask me to say that. But not a problem. If you had this cabin at the lake, and so let's say my wife and I died in 2023. The government says you get to step up the cost basis. Now watch this. You get to use the value at death. So let's say my wife and I died at 2023. Our kids are going to inherit it. The government says you get the value at death. So let's say the value is $150,000 at death. They get to step up the cost basis because they inherit it. If they go to sell that property and they sell it for $150,000, the basis is $150,000. Help me out, church. What is $150,000 minus $150,000? Zero. What is 0 times 15%? Zero. Would my kids have to pay any capital gains tax in that situation? And the answer is no, and neither would yours. That's because we didn't put their names on it with us while we were alive. We allowed them to inherit it, and they got to step up the cost basis. You still with me? All right. Let's go to the next slide, next page. That is probably, the page before is probably the number 2 reason why most attorneys would tell us not to put our kid's name on the asset with us while we're alive, because they don't get to use the stepped up cost basis if they don't inherit the property. This is the number 1 reason why most attorneys would tell us not to put our kids' names on our house with us while we're alive, because the moment we add someone else as an owner on an asset with us, we inherit any problems that may arise in their life. So for example, look at the top one. If my son, if his name were on my house with me, and my son got into an accident and someone died and it was his fault. Do bad things happen to good people? Yes, they do. If my son got in an accident and it was his fault and somebody died and his name is on my house and my son were to get sued, is my house at risk? Yes, it is. I know there's insurance, but insurance has limits. The simple fact is, if my son's name is on my assets, my house, and he gets sued, what I have is at risk too. The one in the middle, I'll not cover all these, but let's go to the one, the IRS. Let's say I put my daughter's name on my bank account with me. I just want her to get it after we die. If I put my daughter's name on the bank account with me, let's say my daughter were to do her tax returns and she were to accidentally mess up and the government audits her. If the government audits my daughter, maybe she messed up on her tax returns accidentally, not intentionally, but the government files a FIFA, you owe more taxes than what you thought. If my daughter messes up on her tax return, she gets audited, the government files a FIFA, is my bank account at risk? Yes. I was at a Free Will Baptist church just east of Asheville a couple of years ago, and I ended up helping a couple in that church with their estate plan. And when I sat down across the table from them, the lady said to me, "Brother Todd, I knew exactly what you were talking about when you said that parents should not add their kids' names on the bank accounts with them, because my brother was added on the bank account by my mom on her bank account, and 3 days before my mom died, my brother got a letter from the IRS that he owed $8,000 in income tax. And guess whose account they took it from? Mom's account that had brother's name on it. The brother didn't like it, the sisters didn't like it, but there was nothing they could do about it. Let's look at the last one in that box. And I know that we don't like to talk about this, but the reality is it happens in the world and it happens in the church. If I have my kid's name on my assets with me, and Lord forbid my child ends up in a divorce, if I have my kid's name on my assets with me, and I have a child that gets divorced, and there's a dividing of assets, is what I have at risk? And the answer is yes. So that is probably the number one reason why most attorneys would tell us that we should not put our kids' names on our assets with us while we're alive, because we inherit any potential problems that may arise in their life. Now, down at the bottom, you'll see other methods that people use. If you want to write out what that means, POD and TOD. POD means payable on death. TOD means transfer on death. Payable on death or transfer on death. So basically what it means is, let's say I decided to put my daughter as a POD on our bank accounts. That means that when my wife and I die, she shows our death certificates and her ID, and it is payable on death. Well, what were to happen if I died and my wife, Lord forbid, had a stroke? Maybe the doctor says her heart's good, her lungs good, she's going to pull through this, but she's got to have somebody to take care of her and make financial decisions and help pay the bills and things like that. So my daughter, if she's just a POD on the bank account, and I've passed away and my wife's surviving owner and she's had a stroke, she goes to the bank and says, "I need to access this money to take care of my mom." The bank pulls it up. "Well, you're a POD. Has your mom died?" "No, there's not a death certificate. She hasn't died." "Well, we're sorry, POD doesn't cover incapacitation." And unless there are some legal documents in place where my wife has given my daughter the authority to make financial decisions on her behalf, then there's no other alternative for my daughter to then to go to court and get appointed as a guardian on behalf of her mom. But when those legal documents are in place, then my daughter would have the authority that she needs. And of course, when you have a revocable living trust, it gives your assets a beneficiary designation, and it covers you in case of an incapacitation issue. All right. You still with me? Say uh-huh. All right. Let's go to the next slide, next page. This is a page that we almost took out of the book. We had a lot of people calling our Free Will Baptist Foundation asking about this question. I think some of you are old enough, and Brother Allen and I think, are old enough to remember when this particular man was president, but President Ronald Reagan. And it was during the Reagan days that they came up with the Tax Growth and Reconciliation Act. It was basically inheritance tax. If you ever watch the news, you'll sometimes hear this called the estate tax or the death tax. Basically, what the Inheritance Tax or the Tax Growth and Reconciliation Act said is if you die and your estate is worth more than X amount of dollars, it will get taxed. And today, the inheritance tax rate is 40%. Now, before you get concerned about that, there is a threshold that everything that you have has to be worth more than a certain amount. When it first came out, it was about $600,000, and it includes everything you've got: IRA, 401k, house, cars, guns, tools, jewelry. In 2019, the threshold was $5.45 million. So over all of those years, that threshold has increased. In 2017, it was $5.45 million. In 2019, when President Trump came into office, he doubled the exemption, so it became $11 million. If it is a married couple, then they get a dual exemption, meaning if it's a married couple, it's $22 million. If it is a single person, widow or widower, it's $11 million. So here's the good news tonight. Unless your estate is worth more than $11 million, then you don't have to worry about the inheritance tax or the estate tax or the death tax. Now, if you are here tonight and your estate is worth more than $11 million, Pastor Allen would like to see you right after this is over, okay? But in all reality, this is one of the reasons why we almost took it out of the book, because it doesn't impact as many people as you would think. Now, and let me ask you this. Can the government lower that threshold? Sure. I mean, we live in a country that is trillions and trillions of dollars in debt. Can the government say, well, this is one way that we can start getting some of this debt paid off, so we're going to start lowering that threshold? Well, what if the government lowered it to what it used to be? Well, if it went back to $5.45 million, it might not impact as many people. What if it went back to what it was when it first started out, $600,000? All right, it would start impacting more and more people. Well, one of the solutions would be is that you can actually gift to your heirs or your children up to $15,000 in a year time, and it be considered a non-taxable event in their life. Now, if you pay somebody $15,000 to do work for you, if you pay somebody $15,000 in a year time to mow your grass, that's earned income. But you and I are allowed to gift up to $15,000 to our children or an individual, up to $15,000 as long as it's gift, and it would be considered non-taxable in their life. Well, what if the government started lowering that? You thought that you were going to get taxed at 40% after your death. You didn't want what you have to get taxed at 40%, so you started giving away money to your children. But then you live longer than what you thought you were going to live, and all of a sudden you need some of that money back. Somebody tell me, if you give money away to your children, you live longer than what you thought you were going to live, and you need some of that money back later, what's your chance of getting it back? Probably zero. God bless you. If you want to give money to your children, that's a prayerful decision between you and the Lord. But the attorneys tell us there's a better way to get assets to the next generation. And by the way, a revocable living trust, it is changeable, it is amendable. Sometimes people will say to me, well, Brother Todd, I had an uncle or an aunt or mom or dad or grandma or granddaddy that had a trust. And my first question is, what kind? This is a revocable living trust, which means it is changeable, it is amendable. What does that mean? Well, in a trust, you're going to have stated who's in charge and who's getting what after death. Well, let's say you have two children named Bob and Sally, and one day, Lord forbid, Bob forsakes God and forsakes mom and dad. And you don't want Bob in charge anymore. You would rather have Sally in charge. It is changeable. It is amendable. If you want to change who's in charge and who gets what in your lifetime, you can do that. Three things that the attorneys tell us about a revocable living trust. It is smart, simple, and cost-effective. You say, what do you mean by that? Well, you remember when I told you that there are companies out in the world that do some of the things that we do. So if you went home tonight and tomorrow you went to your mailbox, not saying this would happen, but let's say you got a postcard in the mail sometime, and it said, come to such and such hotel in the conference room. We'll provide a free meal and we will teach you about estate planning. What will happen is if you go to the hotel and you go to that free meal, it's not actually a free meal because there might be a representative up there teaching about estate planning. And when they get through, they will say, now our company can help you, and the cost is going to be about $3,500 to $4,500 to do this. And the reason is because that representative, it is highly probable that he is making commission off of that. Now, with our Free Will Baptist Foundation, we have partnered with the attorneys and we have negotiated a much discounted price if anybody wants us to help them, and our representatives don't make commission. But if you basically put together with a company out in the world a comprehensive estate plan with a revocable living trust, health care power of attorney, durable power of attorney for husband and wife, living wills for husband and wife, all the legal documents that you would need in life in case of incapacitation, and the distribution of your estate after death, the companies out in the world, that's what they charge. I was at Garner Free Will Baptist Church about a year ago, and this widow came up to me after the presentation and she said, Brother Todd, she said, my husband died a year ago, and she said, I wished we'd have known that the Free Will Baptist Foundation did this. She said, because we did go out to one of the companies out in the world, and she said, we paid $4,200, and I know exactly what you're talking about. And I know that sounds a lot, but what is the difference? Well, so when my wife and I were going to get all of our legal documents in place, we went to the attorney and he said, well, I can do a will, and after you go home to be with the Lord, things will get probated. Well, how long does probate take? Well, it can take anywhere between 30 to 40 hours. Now, please understand, 30 to 40 hours, we're not talking about a 30 to 40 hour work week. See, after we pass away, Mom and Dad has passed away, what the attorneys do is when they are allowed to do the will in life, and then they get to become the attorney of record, if they get to shepherd that estate through the probate process, then they can do billable hours. So they'll work a couple hours this week, they'll work a couple hours the next week, they'll work a couple hours the next month, work a couple hours the next month. And over the course of 6 months to 2 years, they probate that estate if we give them the privilege to shepherd it through the probate process. I'm not saying attorneys are bad. Before my daughter went to work with TSA, she actually worked with a estate planning attorney. And again, I'm not saying attorneys are bad. We partner with good Christian attorneys. They have to feed their family just like anybody else. But my daughter, before she went to work with TSA, she worked with an estate planning attorney in Greenville, South Carolina, and that attorney charged $350 an hour to probate estates. On average, attorneys charge $325 an hour. Again, that depends on the geographical location, and it depends on the attorney. But let's just say, and let's just take the 25 off. So those of you that are good mathematicians here, I want you to help me out. So let's say Mom and Dad have passed away and things are getting probated. If the attorney gets to shepherd it through the probate process, and it takes 30 to 40 hours. If the attorney charges $300 an hour and it takes 30 hours, help me out here, what is 300 times 30? 9,000. What is 300 times 40? 12,000. Well, somebody might say, well, we know a super nice attorney and he will give us a discount. He'll charge us only $200 an hour. And I say that's a rarity, but even if he's a nice attorney, let's say 200 times 30. What is that? 6,000. What's 200 times 40? 8,000. You see, sometimes attorneys don't mind writing wills because that's not really where they make their money. They really get to make their money after people go home to be with the Lord, and they get to do billable hours, and they can charge to probate that estate. And so, when you think about, okay, $6,000 to $12,000 after death, or the attorney said to my wife and I, you can do a trust, you spend a little bit more now, but then your family doesn't have to go through the probate court process after death, and that was one of the reasons why we ended up going with the trust. Let's go to the next page. Let's talk about power of attorney documents. There are two types. There's a healthcare power of attorney. There's a durable power of attorney. Healthcare power of attorney allows someone to make healthcare decisions on our behalf. Durable power of attorney allows someone to make financial decisions on our behalf. Somebody says, should I have a power of attorney document? I'm not an attorney, I can't give legal advice, but power of attorney documents, they shouldn't just be the only documents that you have. They should be a part of a comprehensive estate plan. You can't use, and these are the limitations. Number one, the power ceases at death. You can't use a power of attorney document to settle an estate after death. Sometimes we have had people call us up at our foundation office and they have said, well, I was the power of attorney for my mom or my dad. I'll say that doesn't matter because that power of attorney, the power ceased at death. You can't use that to settle the estate after death. The other limitation is the issue of incompetency. You can't enter into a power of attorney if you are incompetent. And this is the number one reason why most attorneys tell us you should plan. You'll notice in the book, and I think the names Bob and Sally are in the book, and you'll notice on my screen I have the names Charles and Carolyn. Bob and Sally is an illustration that we have used sometimes. I'm going to tell you a story that is a true story about some folks that were in our church in South Carolina. Charles and Carolyn were a couple in our church, and they were very faithful. Brother Charles had worked with the county collecting business taxes from the businesses in the county for 30 years, and he was getting ready to retire. We had an ice storm that came through South Carolina. And they had a dog. They had pine trees in their yard which were weighted down with ice. Charles went to the kitchen, he got a cup of coffee, he raised the garage door, and he let the dog walk around the yard. Charles was standing under the garage door holding the cup of coffee. And what happened was he heard a loud crack, a loud pop. And what had actually happened was there was a pine limb right above the garage door that was weighted down with ice, but he didn't know that. And when he heard that loud crack and that pop, he did something that changed his life for the rest of his life. With that cup of coffee in his hand, he took one step out from under the garage door and he looked up. And when he did that, that limb popped him right in the head. He was immediately incapacitated. He was rushed to MCG in Augusta. They have a special trauma unit there. And he was not only paralyzed, but it did some brain damage, so he became incompetent. At a time in their life where they're getting ready to retire, tragedy struck some very good people, and now Carolyn is thrown into the situation where she is going to have to take care of Charles. It soon becomes evident he's going to be in a 24-hour care facility, and he's probably going to be there the rest of his life. Carolyn is driving 60 miles one way, 120 miles round trip to go visit him on a very regular basis. Carolyn thinks, you know what, I've got to sell the house. Circumstances aren't going to change unless God does a miracle, and I've got to get closer to the 24-hour care facility. So, in order to save on the wear and tear of her vehicle, she wants to sell the house. She goes to a closing attorney and a real estate agent, and she wants to sell the house, and the closing attorney and the real estate agent says, Carolyn, where is Charles? Help me out here, church. Why does it matter where Charles is at? Carolyn wants to sell the house. Why does it matter? Why? Both names are on the deed. Just because someone becomes incompetent, it does not diminish their right legally. Turns out, closing falls apart. Well, I've got this 2-page power of attorney document from the state of Georgia when we lived there several years ago. Carolyn, I'm sorry, we can't use a 2-page power of attorney document from another state to divest Charles of his rights. Do you have anything in this state where you are his guardian? Now Carolyn, who doesn't have the proper legal documents in place, has to go to court and get appointed as a guardian. And by the way, 24-hour care facilities and attorneys don't mind getting appointed as guardians because they'll make money and they're going to make decisions not based on the loved one but based on their bottom line. Pam and I were talking about that today, and she's been in this situation. She understands it. But listen, Attorney Monty Donahue, he's an estate planning attorney. He's the attorney in Ohio that partners with us. He was at our foundation not long ago. He's sitting down talking with us, and he said the fastest growing cases in America are guardianship cases. Because sometimes we think of guardianship as it relates to minor children, and it does. If you have minor children at home, you want to have in a document named who you would want to be the legal guardian of that child or children, Lord forbid, should you pass away while they're a minor. Guardianship does relate to minor children. But it doesn't just relate to minor children. It can relate to anybody at any age in life. And of course, she doesn't have all the legal documents in place, and she does have to go to court and get appointed as a guardian on behalf of Charles. And then, of course, there's court consultation, record keeping, and I would encourage you to write avoidable on that page, because with what our foundation is doing in helping people get all the legal documents in place, that is avoidable. I want to get to the end, so I'm not going to spend much time here. You can fill in the blank. Who benefits from probate? Creditors, lien holders, and attorneys. You can write that in. Again, we're not saying attorneys are bad people. We partner with good, godly Christian attorneys. But we in America spend literally millions and millions and millions of dollars allowing attorneys in the court system to probate our estates. So who benefits? Creditors, lien holders, and attorneys. Creditors, lien holders, and attorneys. Again, I'm not going to linger here. I'll just let you go ahead and fill in the blanks because I want to go ahead and get past this page and get down toward the end. What are the actual costs if somebody decides that they want their estate to be probated? There is time. Takes anywhere between 6 months to 2 years. There is cost, anywhere between 4 to 7% of the value of the estate. The emotional toll, and everything is public. Anything that goes through that court system is public knowledge. And then there's the emotional toll. Again, I'll just let you fill in the blanks and I'll go right along. Time, cost, everything is public, and there is the emotional toll. You still with me? Everybody got that? I don't want to move on if somebody doesn't have a blank filled in. Time, cost, everything is public, and there's the emotional toll. And of course, that is avoidable with what our foundation is doing. You say, wow, Brother Todd, you've told us about all the bad things that can happen. What is the foundation doing? Well, we have a ministry, and we have helped over 2,500 couples or individuals with comprehensive estate planning. And we partner with the attorneys. They do the legal side. We do the ministry side. But if we help a couple or an individual, number one, they get all the legal documents that they need in life in case of incapacitation and for the distribution of their estate. They get lifetime support and settlement at death. What does settlement at death mean? It means you decide who's in charge. You decide who's getting what. We don't have control over anything that you own. You have complete control of everything while you're alive. But whoever you put in charge would be able to call our foundation, and we can have a representative to come and sit across the table and help them, and there's no cost to your family for us to come out to be with them after death. We would be there to help them understand what needs to be done. Did you get that? Legal documents, lifetime support, and settlement at death. That's what we provide as a foundation if we end up helping a couple or an individual. So when you talk about your trust, I tell people you kind of think of it like a safe. It's a legal document. It states who you want in charge and who you want getting what. But everything that we own, now watch this, okay? Everything that we own, spiritually speaking, it all belongs to the Lord. Obviously, we know that. But legally speaking, it falls into two categories, probatable and non-probatable. The things in the box are what's considered non-probatable assets. Those are considered beneficiary assets. Those are things like life insurance, 401ks, pension plans, IRA, annuities, 403bs. They will typically have primary and contingent beneficiaries. Those will go to whoever the named beneficiaries are. But it's all the other stuff, the house, the cars, certain bank accounts, guns, tools, jewelry. Those things are considered probatable, and they can be put into the safe of your trust, and those things can avoid probate after death. So when you think of funding, it doesn't mean you're having to come up with something new. It's just the things that you already have are in the safe of your trust. So if we help a couple and they become joint trustees of their trust, and if one of them passes away, the surviving spouse can call the foundation, and we can have a representative to help that surviving spouse in knowing what needs to be done. Everything flows to the surviving spouse. Now, if you are a single person, a widow, a widower, in other words, if you're a surviving spouse, a single person or a widow, and you would actually just start right there. You would be the sole trustee of your trust. If you're husband and wife, you would start right here. One of you passes away, the surviving spouse calls the foundation, and then that surviving spouse continues in life like they always have. Nothing changes in how they operate their day-to-day life. And then that surviving spouse or that single person, widow or widower, passes away, and their family calls the foundation, and we have a representative to come out and sit across the table with them, and we don't have any authority or any control. They have the authority you've given them, but we would be there to help them understand what needs to be done. Across the table, not in a courtroom. Okay? And distribution can begin immediately. I'm not going to linger here, but I do want to talk about this. Honestly, this is what we call our distribution slide. Now mom and dad have passed away. I honestly wish I had an hour to stay right here. But let's say mom and dad, or let's say you have a $300,000 estate. It doesn't mean you got $300,000 in the bank, but let's say you have added all up, the house, the cars, the bank accounts, the guns, the tools, the jewelry. Let's say you had a $300,000 estate and you have 3 kids. All right, easy math. Mathematicians, help me out here. You ready? You have 3 kids. You have a $300,000 estate. How much is each kid getting in assets? $100,000. Well, you might have a responsible child, and if you give them $100,000 at once, they might spend it wisely. Praise the Lord, hallelujah. Don't raise your hand here, but somebody might have a wild child. It might not mean they're bad. They might not know how to spend money. Are our children different? Mine are very different. If you give a wild child or a child that doesn't spend money wisely $100,000 at once, what's going to happen? They blow it. Here's another one. This is one that is dear to my heart. If there is one reason I don't mind paying taxes, it's to help those that are special needs. I wish I had time. If I had 2 hours, I could stand here and tell you story after story after story. COVID came along. COVID was over. A couple from Beaufort, North Carolina called me and said, Brother Todd, you were at our church a few years ago. We have a special needs child. We should have got something put together back then. We didn't. Will you help us? I said, absolutely. We got everything together. The attorney put the special needs provisions wording in the trust so there could be a special needs trust. You know what I'm talking about, don't you, Pam? So that when Mom and Dad passed away, everything would go to that child that they were to get, but they wouldn't lose any of it. Because what happens if you give $100,000 to a special needs child who is getting assistance, what will happen? They can lose it. But if you set it aside for them in a special needs trust and you put someone in charge of that, a testamentary trustee, so that they get everything that's coming to them, but they get it over time, what happens? They'll get everything and they won't lose that help. And we have helped many families that have special needs children. And when I sat down with that couple, the wife started crying after it was all over. And I thought, oh no, what did I do? Did I say something wrong? And she said, Brother Todd, thank you. I cannot thank you enough because now I know she's protected. And around the corner walked a precious, precious Down syndrome child who wrapped her arms around me, and she didn't have a clue what her mom and dad had just done, but she was a child that was now protected because of what her mom and dad had just done. And again, I wish I had an hour to spend right here. But what about ministry? This is one of the reasons why we as a Free Will Baptist Foundation do what we do. What if Christians decided I'm going to include the Lord's work in my end-of-life planning? What if, I decided to tithe 10% on my estate, or I decided to leave a gift? The ministry of this church has got to continue on even after the Lord, we go home to be with the Lord. What about if I decided to give a monetary gift? We have some, and we don't require that. We cannot tell you who you should leave what to. That's a prayerful decision between you and the Lord. But what if you prayerfully considered this church, Southeastern Free Will Baptist College? I was a couple of weeks ago at the 30th anniversary of Harvest Child Care Ministries. I went up there and volunteered my time to shuttle people between the administration buildings and the dormitory so that people could tour. And they were trying to burn off their mortgage, and they had got it down to about $60,000. The offering for the event was about $10,000. They got it down to $50,000, and they burned the mortgage by faith, believing that by the end of the year, God's going to help them pay it off. But what if you decided, I'm going to include a missionary, a ministry, this church, Free Will Baptist College in my end-of-life planning? Again, we have some people that doesn't have any children, and they're leaving their entire estate to the Lord's ministry. And I would say probably out of the people that we have helped, about 35 to 40% of the people that we have helped have done some type of gift in their end-of-life documents. And again, we don't require that, but we certainly ask people to prayerfully consider it. The choices are in your book. Somebody says, well, I'm not going to choose, have you ever heard this before? I'm just going to let them fight it out after I die. If we say, I'm not going to choose, guess what we just did? We chose. Because if we do nothing and we don't have any legal documents in place, what's going to happen? The state of North Carolina will step in and they'll write something on behalf of our family. So we can go the route of a will, and some people do that. And of course, it is a public process. It does take time. With what our foundation is doing, it keeps things private, and things do not have to go through the probate court system when assets are funded into the trust. So this is what we do as a foundation. We partner with the attorneys. We provide all the legal documents. We provide lifetime support, and we provide settlement at death. The attorneys have negotiated a discounted price if people want us to help them off the price of what the companies in the world charge. But we do also, you're not just getting legal documents. Just the other day I sat down with a couple in Greenville, North Carolina, and I helped them get all their legal documents in place. And when I walked away from their home, I was not walking out of their life. We are there to help any way that we can and guide you through that. So this is on the back of the book. Let me ask you this. Getting down to the end, who should have something in place to protect themselves and their family? Who should be a good steward of that which God has blessed them? Who should? Everybody. Absolutely. Everybody. Everybody. We should all be good stewards of that which God has blessed us with. Now, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to I'm going to come down below so that we can, I can be down here to talk with you just for a few minutes. Here's what we're going to do. There's an attendance form in your book. If you haven't filled that out, you can fill that out. We're going to do a real quick personal review. We're going to watch a 2-minute video, and then I'm going to make some closing remarks and see if anybody's got any questions. I probably should have you out maybe in the next 10 to 15 minutes. Can everybody stick with me for about 10 to 15 minutes? So in this, if you haven't filled out the top part, go ahead and do that. The middle part, you can check these lines. If you own real estate, you can check that line. It might not mean that you have it paid off. My wife and I have a mortgage on our home, but we own real estate. If you have health concerns, you might want to check that line. If you have family concerns, you might want to check that line. If you just say, I want to avoid probate, I want to keep things out of the court system, you can check that line. Or maybe you just want to avoid guardianship, or maybe you just want to keep the courts out of your family business. What our foundation does, and again, we have helped over 2,500 couples or individuals. If you want us to help you, we basically do a $300 deposit, and then once we sit down with you face to face, there's a remaining balance of $2,400 that you can do $100 a month, interest-free for 24 months, or $200 a month for a year. We do not make any money off of that. What we do is we go ahead and prepay the attorney, and we let you reimburse us interest-free. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit, but we're going to watch a video. This is Judge Philip Whitaker. He's actually a Free Will Baptist, ordained minister. He's a judge in the state of Arkansas. He is a licensed minister and an attorney. And this is Judge Philip Whitaker. And we might need to push play on that video for me if you could do that.
Hello, my name is Philip Whitaker. Please allow me to introduce myself. I am a lifelong Free Will Baptist. I am an ordained minister within the denomination. I also have been blessed by God. I am a lawyer, and I've had the privilege of serving 19 years as a judicial officer in the state of Arkansas. I know that you've seen a presentation concerning the necessity and the urgency of some estate planning options. I would just like to address with you briefly my thoughts on this particular topic. First of all, let me tell you that in my experience as a judicial officer, I think it is essential that each home consider some estate planning. I know that you've heard some information about some trusts and how that can fit into your estate planning. As a judicial officer, I would strongly encourage you to give some consideration to the formation of a trust if it meets your particular needs. From personal experience, I can tell you that within my own family, my wife and I have developed trusts as an estate planning option for meeting not only the needs of the distribution of any assets that we might have to our children and our intended beneficiaries, but also to help extend the kingdom of God. So, give some strong consideration to the trust as an option that might meet your needs and what you intend to do, not only for your children, your family, and beneficiaries, but how you can also distribute some of your assets of your estate to continue the ministry of Jesus Christ even after your life.
Judge Philip Whitaker, he's served on our board for about 12 years, and he's a dear brother in Christ, and we thank the Lord for the benefit that our foundation has had by having him on our board. I want you, this page is not in your book, but as an illustration, and this is the last slide that we're going to look at, but I want you to look at the left column right there. If you own a home in America, what do you pay? You pay homeowners insurance. And on average, and you can look it up, on average, homeowners insurance is about $1,000 a year. Now, obviously, it depends on the size of the home, and it depends on the geographical location. But on average, it's about $1,000 a year. So if you own a home, and it doesn't have to be the same home. You might have owned 2 or 3 different homes, sold one, live in a different one later on. But basically, if you owned a home or homes for 5 years and you had homeowners insurance, how much did you pay over the course of 5 years on average in homeowners insurance? You paid about $5,000. If you own a home for 10 years, how much did you pay in homeowners insurance? $10,000. Here's my point. We as Christians spend thousands of dollars over the course of a few years protecting one asset that God has blessed us. You say, should we do that? And I say, absolutely. That's being a wise steward. My wife and I have got homeowners insurance. And we say, if we're going to spend thousands of dollars and are willing to do that to protect one asset for something that might happen, let's be good stewards and invest a little bit in protecting all of that which God has blessed us. So the companies out in the world that do what we do, they charge about $3,500 to $4,500. They're for profit. Their representatives do make commission. If somebody goes the route of a will, and those are the potential cost, it can take anywhere between 6 months to 2 years, depending on factors. There is no normal probate, but it is the route that some folks take. And this is what we are doing. Our foundation is a nonprofit ministry. Representatives like myself, I do not make one dime off of anybody that I help. Again, I'm salaried just like a pastor, just like Pastor Allen. Whether I help 5 families in a year or 50 families in a year, my greatest benefit is the honor and joy to serve you. We do not make money off of anybody. Obviously, attorneys don't work for free, but what we do is we do provide lifetime support and we provide settlement at death. When we go out to be with your family after death, there is no cost to them for us to come out and be with them. That is a ministry on our part. But for a husband and wife together or for a single person, widow or widower, we do a $300 deposit. Once I'm sitting across the table from you, and we actually have the documents, all the legal documents in place, it is at that time that you get an invoice for the remaining balance. Now what we do, we go ahead and prepay the attorney because we want to make it affordable for the members of our churches or those that attend. You don't have to have be a member here. I hope you are, but if you're here, and we do extend it to family. But once we're sitting across the table, that's when you can decide, okay, I'll pay it in full or I'll do interest-free payments. We have about 50% of the people that we help that pay in full and about 50% of the people that do interest-free payments. If you do want us to help you, there's 3 steps, and I'm going to give them to you, and then I'm going to see if we got any questions, and then we'll close. I'm going to give you 3 simple steps if you want us to help you. Don't write this on the attendance form because you might be turning that in, but write this maybe on one of the pages in the book. If you want us to help you, 3 simple steps. Step 1 is some basic information, and we get a $300 deposit. We cannot get the attorneys engaged in the process without a $300 deposit. They have to have something to get engaged. Step one, basic information. And let me explain to you. We do not need to know your Social Security number. We do not need to know your bank account number. We do not need to know how much money you have in the bank. We don't need to know what your 401k or IRA is worth. When I say basic information, here's what I'm talking about. Legal name and date of birth of the husband and wife. Legal names and date of births of the children. Your address and phone number and contact information. The county you live in. That's basic information. Step one, basic information, the $300 deposit. And we can do that by check or credit card over the phone or whatever is fine with us. Step two is the attorney is going to call. In the state of North Carolina, we partner with attorney Patrick Neighbors. He is a Christian, just retired from the military last year. He has a practice in Cary, North Carolina. He retired as a lieutenant colonel. He was a JAG instructor, but he would end up calling, and if we're going to help you and you turn in your form that you do want us to help you, you would get a blue and white folder, and Attorney Patrick Neighbors' information is inside of this folder. But Attorney Patrick Neighbors would call you, and he would find out two things. And you don't have to go to his office. He would talk to you. Two most important things in these documents: who's in charge and who's getting what after death. For example, and I don't mind telling you my situation. My wife and I, we've got 3 children. Our oldest daughter is our primary. Husbands and wives are appointed for one another. My daughter, Victoria, is appointed as, she's an alternate appointee under my wife and I. And then we do have our son Cameron as an alternate to my daughter. But if you just have one child or one legal child, you can list that one child. But sometimes at step one, people say, Brother Todd, I've got 2 kids, Mary and Johnny, and they'll say, we want Mary listed first under us and Johnny listed second. You don't have to know who you want in charge to start the process, but basically step one is basic information, the deposit. Step two, the attorney's going to call and he's going to find out who you want in charge. He'll find out, do you want things equally divided or how you want that done. Again, over the phone, he'll talk with you. Step three is the final step. That is when I personally would come up and sit across the table from you. It can be in your home, it can be at the church, and help you get all the legal documents in place. At that time, when I am sitting face to face with you, we have gone ahead and prepaid the attorney for drafting all the legal documents. And again, it's every legal document that you need in life in case of incapacitation and for the distribution of your estate after death. At that time, you can decide to pay $100 a month for 24 months or $200 a year for a year. And we would help you get the legal documents in place. If you want us to help you, you would turn in your form and I would give you a starter kit and we would get the process started. I would call you over the next few days and just get some basic information from you. If you do want us to help you, on that attendance form, I would encourage you to, in that space down at the bottom, if you do want us to help you, put the legal names of your children, and at the top where you have your legal names, please put your legal names and date of birth. So maybe you can write the date of birth above the husband's name and the date of birth above the wife's name. And down here you can put the legal names of the children and their date of birth. How the attorney would normally do that is he would normally do first legal name, middle initial, last legal name. Unless somebody goes by their middle name, then he would spell out. For example, my youngest son is Brandon Huntington Smith. He goes by Hunter, so he spells out. But in most cases, the attorney would do first legal name, middle initial, last name. So if you do want us to help you and you're going to turn in your form that you do want us to do that, please list the legal names of your children, first name, middle initial, last name, and date of birth. Real quickly, and you have been so attentive, and I have gone over longer than whether we're going to help you or not, okay? How many of you say, I learned some things tonight? Okay. Then I'm glad you did. Some of you may have already known a lot of these things. And I say, I'm glad you have. This is a ministry for us. I'm not up here trying to sell you anything because I don't get not one dime of benefit. I just want to help you get something in place. Obviously, attorneys don't work for free, and you're not just getting legal documents with us. You're getting lifetime support, and we do provide settlement at death. Are there any questions? Somebody might have a question. I'll say just maybe about 5 minutes of questions, and then we'll close it out. Yes, sir, Brother Jim.
While I'm contemplating this, who would I send it to if I don't turn it in for you?
You would just call me. Yes, sir. Just call me, and we would help get the process started. If you want to turn in your form and you're not sure at this time whether or not we're going to help you, you can put on the form, I'm thinking about it. If you say, Brother Todd, I do want you to help, and you would write the code FWB on the form. I will tell you this, and let me just share this with you in closing. We can't predict what attorneys will charge 5 years down the road, much less next year. If somebody gets the process started and they pay the $300 deposit, if the attorneys go up next year or 5 years down the road, if someone has already paid the deposit and got engaged in the process, the agreement that we have with the attorneys is that they will not go up. They would not have to pay the higher price. I don't think attorneys are going to go down. Most of the time they tend to go up over the years. Let me mention this. Sometimes people want to know, do you extend it to family? We do. Sometimes people say, I wish there was somebody here in my family that could have heard this. The other thing is, sometimes people will say, well, what if I move, or what if I own property in another state? If you go the route of a will, and if that's the route you choose, that's between you and the Lord. But if you go the route of a will, if you own property in North Carolina, it has to be probated in North Carolina. If you own a cabin in the mountains of Tennessee, it has to be probated in Tennessee. A will, if you think one state probate is tough, 2 states is even tougher. A will does not cross state lines. Property in North Carolina has to be probated in North Carolina. Property in Virginia, probated in Virginia. Property in Tennessee has to be probated in Tennessee. If you move, or if you own property out of state, a revocable living trust will cross state lines. So if you own property in North Carolina, you can deed in-state property and out-of-state property. Sometimes we do get asked this question, well, Brother Todd, what if I move and I move to be close to some grandkids or kids somewhere in another state, and there's not a Free Will Baptist church there, and I'm just attending some other church. Are y'all still going to commit to this? And we say absolutely. So here's the thing. If you retire and you move to Hawaii to retire and you pass away, I promise I'll personally come out and sit down with your family. In all sincerity, we make that commitment to you, no matter where you go. Now, I hope that you stay here and a part of this wonderful church, but it does cross state lines, and we make that commitment to you no matter where you're at. Any other question?
One more. We have a will.
Yes, sir.
So will this just do away with it, or do we have to do something?
Thank you, Brother Jim. That's a good question. So what happens is, once we're sitting down face-to-face across the table, if you have some documents in place and you want us to help you, the way that works legally is the most recent signed notarized copies supersede the previous ones. So what that means is, once you get the new documents in place and we're sitting face-to-face and all those new documents get signed and notarized, at that point, that supersedes the previous documents. You wouldn't have to do anything. Just kind of hold on to the current documents that you have. If you want us to help you, then at that time it would supersede those documents. Very good question. Anybody else? You might have a question that you didn't want to ask publicly, but you wanted to ask privately. I'm going to stay up front, and if you want to come up here and ask me privately. If you do want us to help you and you have written the legal names of your children on that form, and you do want to turn in your form to me, Brother Todd, we do want you to help us. I'll give you a starter kit, and inside it has everything that you need. I'll call you over the next couple of days, and we'll get the process started. All right.